Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
This scene from Kamal symbolizes one of the principal concerns in the cinema of the Bengali filmmaker Ritwik Ghatak. It articulates his obsession, the anguish and agony of a person unable to reconcile to the partition of Bengal. The trauma of this division, the lament and tragedies of people uprooted from their traditional moorings, was to cast its shadow on the entire body of work of Ritwik Ghatak. By the time he died at the age of 51, Ghatak had become a cult figure to many a young filmmaker in India. His work had been dominated by doses of melodrama, but delineated with such personal vision that he was acknowledged an original artist of the Indian cinema, erratic at times, but always supremely confident. And the total concept of cinema as art was his preoccupation. As he once said, the film is basically a matter of personal statement. All arts are in the final analysis, and films seem to be an art. Ghatak was born in 1925 in Dhaka, now in Bangladesh. He spent his childhood as part of a large joint family. His father was a bureaucrat, and the Ghataks lived in numerous small towns of East Bengal. To young Ritwik, the images of the rivers of Bengal, the local dialects, the folklores, and the terrain were so deeply ingrained in his subconscious, he never could exorcise them from his mind.
সেই পূর্ব বাংলা, সেই নিসর্গ, সেই নদী, সেই ভাই বোন দাদা দিদি মিলে আনন্দ, তারপরে সমস্ত কিছু হারিয়েছেন, সেই ব্যথা এবং সেই ভাষা সব কিছু বলছেন যে আমি বায়ুভূত নিরালম্ব, আমি কি করে সেটা পাবো, সেই রূপকথা, সেই দেশ, কিন্তু এই দেশে কি নেই? নিশ্চয়ই আছে, এবং একদিন হয়তো এর মধ্যে আমি অভ্যস্ত হয়ে যাব, কিন্তু আজকে আমার পক্ষে খুব কঠিন।
Ritwik migrated to Calcutta as a young man, where, before cinema, he was involved in theatre, acting, writing and directing plays for the Indian People's Theatre Association, which was a social consciousness movement to educate the masses.
বিসর্জন দেখেছি, তার পরিচালনা দেখেছি, তার অসাধারণ অভিনয় দেখেছি, এবং তার যে আরতি, সেই রঘুপতির কঠিন চরিত্র, তার পাশাপাশি অপর্ণা এবং জয়সিংহের চরিত্র, এবং সেইখানে কবিগুরুর যে সেই হিংসা নয় শান্তি চাই, সেটা ভীষণভাবে ফুটে বের করেছেন, এবং সেই সেট, তার কস্টিউম, তার সব কিছু তিনি ভেবেছিলেন, করেছিলেন।
In 1943 had come the gruesome Bengal famine, a man-made tragedy of such immensity it was to leave its scar on the psyche of every artist of that generation. (1947) saw the birth of independent India, unfortunately in the crucible of communal hatred, which also saw the partitioning of Bengal. Ghatak witnessed the enormity of human suffering, and through these searing experiences, a committed artist was born.
He was a right-minded person before the partition. He became left-minded after the partition. He could not get out of the trauma of the partition, you see. He missed his city and the Padma river.
In this scene from Kamal made in 1961, Ghatak confirms that his umbilical cord with his East Bengal was very much intact. No other filmmaker had been so haunted by the El Dorado of his past, a promised land he believed he had lost when the country was partitioned. But Kamal was also a requiem for the IPTA days, a reappraisal of the reasons why the IPTA movement had failed him. In his very first film, Nagorik, Ghatak's temperament was evident. The film is set in the post-war Calcutta, and it narrates a rather bleak story of the tribulations of a young man in search of a job and his gradual deprivation. But by the end of the film, the protagonist refuses to admit defeat, resolving instead to struggle with those living and toiling in the slums. This heroic posture was to become Ghatok's favorite symbol. Nagorik was made 2 years before Satyajit Ray's Pother Panchali, but the film was believed to have been lost and discovered accidentally only after Ghatok's death.
খুব শুনেছি নাগরিকের কথা এবং অনেক সময় বলতেন যে নাগরিক মুক্তি লাভ করেনি আমি আই উইল কমিট সুইসাইড এরকম আমাকে বলেছেন আর কি এবং সেই সময়ই আমার সঙ্গে পরিচয় মানে ভীষণ একটা হতাশার সময় কিন্তু সেটাও কাটিয়ে উঠেছেন এটাই বৈশিষ্ট্য আর কি কারণ এরপরে তো আমরা বোম্বে চলে গেলাম
He turns up in 1954 and he's in such of a job and he's doing a job at Filmistan Studios, 300 rupees per month. He's given a small table and a small chair, uncomfortable, and he sits there and puffs at his beedi and curses the Filmistan people. And he says, this is not my place, but what do I do? I have to do something. And after 10 months, he ultimately comes to Bimalda and says, please rescue me. And Bimalda happens to be a family friend of the Ghataks. And he used to know Ritwik, who was called by them. His pet name was Bhoba, you know. So he says, all right, Bhoba, come and sit with us. He started sitting, and there the story idea of Madhumati was taken up from him.
Ghatak wrote the story for Madhumati, a murder mystery based on the theory of reincarnation. This Hindi film, directed by Bimal Roy, starred Dilip Kumar and Vaijayantimala and went on to become a great commercial success. But Ghatak left Bombay to return to Calcutta. It was Ajantrik, the second feature film he directed, which brought attention to Ghatak's remarkable and original talent. The film is ostensibly about the relationship between a ramshackle jalopy and its driver Bimal. And the jalopy as conceived by Ghatak, even in the drawings he executed, becomes an important character, almost an alter ego with whom Bimal has an eccentric and emotional bond. For Ghatak, Ajantrik was primarily a commentary on integrating the future into our heritage, the emotional integration of acquired technology to our daily lives. Although the film ends with the jalopy being dismantled and sold as scrap, the director does not lose heart and believes there is still hope of coming to terms with the machine age.
Ghatak, finally, I think, to use a coin of phrases, he found a Ghatakian solution to a cinematic problem, which to me is an act of genius. And it worked very often, and at times it didn't. But the fact is that this man functioned so spontaneously, so intuitively towards a scene, towards shot division, towards a cut, towards use of music or soundtrack. To say that it is completely codified and structured before he actually started shooting, I don't think is true. I don't think so. But this is very important, the role of intuition, which is Ghatak.
Notwithstanding the commercial failure of his earlier films, Ghatak launched Meghe Dhaka Tara, confident he had integrated the theoretician in him to his cinematic vision. For Ghatak admirers, Meghe Dhaka Tara remains one of his most accomplished works. Its simple storyline captures the tragic rhythm of life in an uprooted middle-class refugee family. The story of Neetha, a young woman whose personal sacrifices enable her family to stand the onslaught of destitution and who is finally stricken by TB. The film has its melodramatic moments, but Ghatak uses these to his advantage.
প্রথম নিতা জানতে পারছে তার টিভি ফার্স্ট টাইম তো কাশির যখন গমকটা এসে আমাকে বললো যে ভীষণভাবে এত ভালো ডিরেক্টর আমি তারপরে অনেক ভালো ভালো ডিরেক্টরের সঙ্গে কাজ করেছি বাট ঋত্বিকদার কতগুলো ব্যাপার ছিল যে মানে প্রথমত ভীষণ আপন করে নেওয়া এবং পুরো মানে ওই যে আমাকে বললেন যে তোর যে কাশিটা আসছে ভেতর থেকে তোর মনে হবে তির 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 করে কিছু একটা গরম জিনিস বেরিয়ে আসছে ব্লাডটা যে বেরোবে সেই এক্সপ্রেশনটা তুই কর মানে আমাকে বোঝানে যে কেউ অস্বস্তি হচ্ছে কাশছিস চোখটা তোর বড় হয়ে যাচ্ছে ফিলিংস যে না সামথিং মানে আমার যেন মনে হচ্ছে কি গরম বেরিয়ে আসছে এইরকমভাবে আমাকে দেখাতেন আর কি এবং আমি একদম টোটালি ফলো করতাম তারপরে আবার নিজে বলতেন তুই কিন্তু পুরুষ মানুষের মতো করবি না তুই তোর মেয়েলি ঢঙে অ্যাক্টিংটা কর
to welcome Durga. So he would always play with the audience, with this much of confidence that this is going to be accepted. It will have more tragic an impact. So that was Ritwik Ghatak.
For a filmmaker almost obsessed with a personal vision, Ghatak fought relentlessly against commercial realities, contending with producers always on the lookout for the usual formula stories and happy endings.
The financier distributor of the film was a very good friend of Ritwik Da. He said he is suspecting me because he knows I am not going to yield to his demand of a happy end of the film. No, Nita can't live on it. You know that.
আমাকে ঋত্বিকদা বলল কান্না চাই না আমার, তুই কখনো কাঁদিস না, তুই চিৎকার কর, তোর তোর কান্নাটা হবে তোর চিৎকারে, মানে বাস্ট। যে আমি কিন্তু বাঁচতে চেয়েছিলাম, এই যে পৃথিবীর সুখ ভালোবাসা আমি সব পেতে চেয়েছি, বাট আই ডিডন্ট গেট ইট। তো এইটা তুই তুই বুক ফাটা চিৎকার কর।
We said all that was written. The distributor financier was very happy. After all, he has won over Ritwik Ghatak, little knowing that merely through dubbing such a tragedy would be brought about. So the picture had to have its tragic end the way Ritwik Da wanted.
For an artist to whom filmmaking was a passion, Ghatak never had the luxury of healthy budgets for the kind of films he enjoyed making. But he found ways to improvise and achieve what he envisaged, even when his producers could not give him the basic technical supports.
Those classical songs sang by a great singer like Ekti had to be picturized without playback machines because Ritwik Da and his producer could not afford to pay the rental. So that was the type of filmmaking which has fortunately or unfortunately been Ritwik Da's lot all through his career. He has never had that type of financial backing where as you go out to work, you carry all the gadgets with you. Camera is a must, film one has to buy. Ritwik Da also had to do that. But beyond that, for obvious economic reasons, there are so many gadgets, equipments which he could not requisition, he couldn't work with. So there was no playback machine. There was no handy tape recorder either. A member of IPTS song squad who was also a very famous footballer, Montuda, we used to call him Montuda, little senior, used to sing those songs from a distance and I used to give, when I'm very close to the camera, very close, almost maintaining this type of distance, I would certainly start using my hands. Oh, this, that. So that will confuse you. The disturbance in the foreground, the movement of the fingers will be such that actually even if I have missed, if there has been false lips, it will just get lost in some kind of excitement created both by the artist and the director.
If East Bengal and its cultural traditions were engraved in Ghatak's psyche, Ghatak was also raised under the cultural influence of Rabindranath Tagore. He made extensive use of Tagore's songs, and nowhere more effectively than in this sequence from Meghe Dhaka Tara. Subarnarekha was the third film in what is referred to as his refugee trilogy. The film was set in a refugee colony of post-partition Calcutta. But to Ghatak, the film was more than just a problem of rootlessness. In the overall pessimistic tone of the film, Ghatak aimed at depicting the economic and political crisis which he felt left them all bereft of conscience or moral sense. And he hit hard at this disintegration. In Subarnarekha, the disintegrating moral value is symbolized by Sita, the heroine, who is compelled into prostitution, and in the confrontation between her and her brother who comes to her unknowingly as a customer. With Subarnarekha, an important phase in Ritwik Ghatak's life also came to an end. He gave up feature film making to take up a position as Vice Principal of the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune. And in the 2 years he spent there, he left his indelible mark as film theoretician and teacher.
It was moments of great exhilaration, great discovery, and a tremendous amount of exuberance towards the act of filmmaking, the act of filmmaking. When I was there as a student, he took a few classes. And what I gathered really from a person like Ghatak is that what he gave you was a sense of being. That's very important for a filmmaker, a sense of pride. The fact that you are a creator. These are important things, you know, for a young person out there who's a student, who's 19, 20, 21 years old.
He contributed to making 2 remarkable short films with his students in Pune. One of them is Rendezvous. Rendezvous remains almost deceptively simple, but to the students of FTII, this practical workshop, which gave an insight to Ghatak's intuitive approach to filmmaking, has made this short a cult film. By this time, alcoholism and illness were taking its toll, and for the next few years after his stint at the FTII, he made some documentaries and once again 2 unfinished feature films. This legacy of unfinished films, many of them abandoned requiring only a few days of work left for completion, is a testament as much to Ghatak's temperament as to the fickle-mindedness of his producers.
The last film he was trying to make, Rongair Golam, I was the hero in that film, and he was so sick. We did the outdoor shootings for just 4, 5, 6 days in a place very close to Shanti Niketan. He would go to the location with much difficulty. Actually, we used to carry him there. But once he holds the handle of the camera or looks through the frame, he's a changed personality. Nobody would believe that he's so sick that even to clean his teeth, he needed assistance. And he had to be provided with country liquor at short intervals in that much of quantity.
I think it is a kind of a man who is complicated. Anyone who is complicated and very terribly sensitive and terribly ambitious and creative, and also who do not find any outlet, you see, they have to drink. Perhaps drink helps it.
In 1971 came the Bangladesh Liberation War, and with it, the hopes of a cultural unity between the 2 Bengals was again aroused. Ghatak had been moved and inspired to make documentaries pleading for the war cause and the liberation of Bangladesh. During his lifetime, Ghatak had never traveled abroad. Now, for the first time, the artist whose lament for the uprooted and the exiled was a constant refrain went out of India to Bangladesh, to his El Dorado, to make Titash, Ekti, Nadir, Naam. The film revolves around the life of a fishing community on the banks of the river Titash, but the river steadily dries up. Yet, even as the heroine lies dying of thirst on its sandy bed, she dreams of hope, of green fields and better life. This optimism amidst despair was a favorite Ghatak position. Ironically, he was himself close to death, struggling to fight TB and his alcoholism, even as he was completing the film.
During the latter years, the last picture that the script he wrote, you know, Gappo, Jukti, Takko, Gappo. So he used to write it in Bimalda's house. He came to Bhabi and said, I want a place to write. Bhabi gave him a room which is aside, Bimalda's own bungalow in Mount Mary. And there my nephew, a boy, I gave him as an assistant. And I heard from my nephew every day daily report that he would buy, tharra, and go to him, he would drink and write till he became unconscious. Then he would wake up and then once again start to write. And he wrote the whole script in 1 month's time and then met me and said, will you listen to my script? I felt very happy. It was a kind of an honor, I felt. And I listened to the script and I felt so good. And I told him, who is going to play the lead? He said, I will do.
Jukti, Takko and Gappo was an uneven film, technically uncertain, but it was brutally honest and an indictment of the intellectual climate, a devastating self-critique of the confusion and hypocrisy of artists, whose committedness to Ghatak was only a facade. Ghatak's passion and his prolific talent as an auteur of Indian cinema were evident not only in the use of music, sound, myths and allegories, but also in the numerous sketches and drawings which were discovered among his papers. An accomplished playwright, Ghatak left a legacy of incomplete scripts which give an insight to the vast spectrum of his interest and passion. But to the very end, he was totally devoted to films and filmmaking.
Even when he was in his deathbed, we were just waiting for the hour. He did talk about films, and he was not at all willing to die. This man wanted to live. This man wanted to make films and do nothing but make films.
He was a meteor which was going to burn itself out. Burn itself out. He was not, I think, a long distance runner. He wasn't that. But he soared. He really soared in the moments that he was there. That is Ghatak.
This clip is from the last film he was working on, a documentary on the renowned Bengal sculptor Ram Kinkar. Ritwik Ghatak died on 6th February 1976, before he could complete the film.